Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller. This is a podcast for your personal evolution. In this episode, 10 most common attachments that detach us from ourselves. When you read messages on spirituality, which I pursue a lot, you'll find a lot of references to the dangers of what we're attached to. Now, I grew up on the Bible, which I feel taught attachment to nothing but God. And in recent years, I followed the works of people like Anthony Mello and Dr. David R. Hawkins on the dangers of attachment from a spiritual standpoint. Now, however, someone came to focus on attachments from a clinical psychology perspective. Dr. Bob Rosen. He holds a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Pittsburgh and serves as faculty in George Washington University's School of Medicine's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Bob is founder and CEO of Healthy Companies. He's advised over 500 CEOs across 60 countries. He previously authored the New York Times bestseller Grounded and Washington Post bestseller Conscious. His new book is Detach, Ditch Your Baggage to Live a More Fulfilling Life. And in it, his research led to 10 categories of attachments that most hinder us. My interest in this is acute and personal, as I've come to realize how much I've imprisoned myself with all the duties and roles and achievements in my life that I directly attach to my identity. And in this, I was more and more at threat. If I couldn't retain control over all those attachments, the very root of my identity was then at threat. And it nearly wrecked me. Someone once asked me who I was if you took away everything I'd done, all the titles, all the labels in my life. I just didn't have an answer. So as you're going to hear Bob state, it's not that all attachments are bad. It's how severe they are ultimately. He says the more we identify with our attachments, the more we suffer. But Bob's focus on detachment is not about just disconnecting from the world, but connecting to ourselves, which I now feel is the root of security. And if you want to look for him, bobrosen.com. He's got an attachment assessment and he's got a bunch of other resources for you. And hey, if you want to talk about this personally, I can connect you with Bob. I can look at guiding you, possibly myself, or getting you with another guide. Connect with me at kmiller@kevinmiller.co. All right, coming up next then is Bob Rosen and this discussion on our attachments. Let's evolve ourselves today. Well, Bob, getting this book across my desk, it was one of those, you had me at hello moments on the topic. And then I really appreciate how you come at it and literally separating it into or categorizing the 10 areas of attachment. Just greatly beneficial to me. I've got questions as usual. That's why you're here. So I'm grateful. Thanks for being with me.
My pleasure, Kevin. Really looking forward to it.
And I wanted to ask, okay, first off, when we say attachments, I want you to help everybody understand that we're not talking about attachment styles. We've done shows on, attachment styles, but I know it can get caught up in that. So real quick, just give us the explanation of it's not that, it's this.
Right. Well, I'm a psychologist by training, and I've always been interested in self-awareness and self-development. But in my career coaching CEOs around the world, I really came to appreciate Western psychology, which was all about goals and drive and positive aspirational thinking, and Eastern psychology, which is all about uncertainty and change and how attachments get in the way of our fulfillment, happiness, and success. So attachments, in the way I'm talking about it, are like baggage, heavy baggage that we carry inside us as we accumulate over our lives. And underneath each of these attachments are fears that we develop. And it gets in the way of our own happiness. It drags us down and it wears us out. And they're all built around stories or thoughts and belief systems that we create inside our heads. So that's what attachments are. It is not attachment styles, and it's not the good side of attachment, although the 10 attachments are all good to some extent. And then they become difficult and disabling.
And that's where I want to go with it. When you wrote in the book about it being baggage, in my mind's eye, I went to one of my favorite Christmas movies is Scrooge. It's the Albert Finney version. And it shows Jacob Marley. I guess all the versions do. Jacob Marley, his old partner, coming in, carrying the chains. Everybody's probably seen that, dragging the chains of his life. And it was kind of depicted like the sins of his life in essence. But that's what I thought of when you said baggage, that my attachments are what's weighing me down. Now, as you talk about Western and Eastern aspects of it, my first exposure to attachments in the way that you have, that we're going to talk about it today, was Anthony de Mello.
Mm-hmm.
He's Jesuit priest, and he was the first one that I read talking about attachments, and it's impacted me greatly since then. And I've read some other books, Letting Go by I can't remember David.
Hawkins.
Okay. Yeah, right. But never really a specific focus like this on attachments. It feels somewhat of a void, and again, incredibly grateful that you're focusing on it. Can I ask, just in that aspect, where was your first exposure, and were there any other sources on, Western, Eastern side that brought you into this focus on attachments?
That's a great question. Well, as I said, I've always been interested in Eastern and Western psychology, but it's a lot more than that. There was a period in my life when I had quite a few health problems, and I had to really get in touch with my life and the uncertainty of my life. And we can talk more specifically about that. But I really dug deep into Buddhism at the time. I was clearly trained as a Western psychologist, but I really wanted to understand the science and of Buddhism. And I did that in my 40s. But I'm a psychologist and a business guy, and I spent the last 40 years coaching top executives in great companies around the world. I ran my own company. I met with over 600 CEOs in 55 countries. I've written 8 leadership books. And as I've traveled, I've met a lot of really interesting people who shared their life stories with me. But that was just my professional life. And like all of us, I've got a personal and a private life. And over time, I learned about that power of self-awareness and the deep connection between the changes we make inside our heads and the impact it has on our behavior and our leadership. So I wanted to write a book, Detach, that was very different from my leadership books. I wanted to write something about life. So I was born in a lower middle class family. And my parents were divorced when I was 13, and I was embarrassed about my upbringing and felt anxious about my financial insecurity. So I overcompensated to be the best little boy in the world. And I worked through my adolescence and received a DuPont scholarship, got my PhD in clinical psychology and a MacArthur Foundation grant by age 30. But there was a big gap between who I wanted to be and who I was. And so I was very much attached to the past and where I came from, and I had to shed it. I also became very attached to the future with my drive and ambition, which ultimately led to an attachment to pleasure, because later in my life with my surgeries, I developed an opiate addiction, and that lasted for a couple years. So I'm very much right in your bullseye in terms of what you care about, in terms of being an ambitious guy who drove my own life but had my own share of attachments.
Okay, well, Bob, I'm 54, and I have understood the concept intellectually for a while of you're not what you do. And I've even harped on that, preached on that probably. You're not what you do. And so I've understood that intellectually, but it didn't really take root. And it hasn't been till far too recently of realizing my attachments to my identity in my roles, in my, and not just the consummate materialistic, like, I'm my Porsche, which I don't have a Porsche, but, I'm my things necessarily, but my roles, as a spouse, as a husband, but really deeper than that, my attachments to the hero complex has been a really big one. I think it continues, maybe like anything, as you get awareness. You've already mentioned that. As you get awareness of something, to me, it wasn't like all of a sudden I got awareness. Oh, attachments. It continues to unfold.
Absolutely.
And I continue to kind of feel like I'm stepping back and I see the hope in it. And it's not even that it's bad, but I found it to be disorienting to step back from those attachments. Is that what you find?
Well, I think a lot of people have a goal that the goal of life is to be happy. And I don't believe that. I think the goal of life is to live it fully. And life has its ups and downs. There are births and growth, and then loss and death. And that is of ideologies, of belief systems, of nature, of people, of relationships, that life goes like this. But nobody teaches us how to live in uncertainty, to go up and down. And that's one problem with education today, is that we don't really understand how to thrive in uncertainty because we all fall down. Another thing that I really agree with what you said is that we live in a world where the paradigm is what you do defines who you are. But at some point in our midlife, if we do our work, we turn that paradigm upside down that says who you are drives what you do. And that is so central to our own healthy development when we make that shift. And so I totally agree with you on that. And the attachments are what hold us back. And we all have a different group of attachments.
Okay, you just said who you are drives what you do. Now, my book is What Drives You, of course. And I look at that and I go, yeah, I agree with that. Who you are drives what you do, for better or worse. And I have experienced the better and the worse, and I'm trying to deconstruct the worse and stick with the better. I'm being driven by, well, even with attachments, Bob. So before really digging into your book and your message, I have looked at, well, here's what I struggled with, I'll say, with attachments is I get the concept. If I am attached to my identity, my status, my stuff, my whatever, there's too many things I can't control. So I'm in danger of that. But, and the big but to me is, but I also don't just want to be so self-actualized. Let's use that concept for now. I don't need anything. I'm just good. I'm on a mountaintop in my robe. I don't need anything. I think of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, right? And he comes to this aspect of security somewhat in himself, even as he's in prison, being abused. And I like the analogy of going, okay, yeah, but when the war was over and they came to get him out, he didn't say, you know what? No, I'm good, man. I figured it out. I'm good right here in prison. He's like, get me the hell out, please, and get me a nice meal and a hotel. That I don't want to just be, so unattached. I'm not attached to anything. Help reconcile that a little bit. Because over here, you're full on dysfunctionally, unhealthily jailed, attached to stuff. But the goal isn't just to be over here and not give a crap about anything. Fair?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One is that it's not about disconnecting from the world. It's about reconnecting to yourself. And we actually become disconnected from ourselves at various times in life, particularly when we get hit with arrows and things like that. The other thing is that I wrote a book about 15 years ago called Just Enough Anxiety, and it differentiated between too little anxiety, which is the face of complacency, and too much, which is the face of chaos. But what we need to do is live with just the right amount of anxiety or energy or drive, if you call it, that pushes us forward, but we can't be held back by the obstacles of these attachments that get in our way. And so when we talk about the 10, I think you get a better sense of how they hold us back. So I'm a big fan of living on the edge, and allowing your values and goals to drive you, just like you talk about. But there are things that are going to hold you back, and you got to focus on them, or you never become the person that you want to be.
Okay. And I do want to jump into the 10 because I'd really like to do them as much justice as we can.
Yeah.
I do have one more kind of a 10,000 foot view on my own grappling with attachments that kind of counter to that. I don't want to just be up on top of the mountain and don't need anything, because to some degree, I love my attachments to some, right. But that's different than I'm confined to them. I love them. So this evening, I am always looking forward to dinner. I think that'll be my next book is just dinner because that's my favorite part of the day. And I'm always looking for, I always have planning something. What am I going to make? And I put the music on depending on the mood and the food items, glass of wine or glass. What's
You
that?
got all those kids around.
That's true. Got to feed those guys. Yeah. But I'm setting the stage and I like cooking. I like the ritual of it. I like the joy and then sitting down together, whether we're going to talk, play a game, watch a show, whatever. I like all that. Okay. I like liking it. I like some attachment to that, but thinking about my relationship, do I have to have it? If I don't have it, am I devastated? Am I depressed? Is that somewhat of a fair depiction? Say you're saying not the attachment's not bad. It's the kind of attachment. Is that too simplistic?
It's the severity of the attachment.
Severity. Okay.
See, just to give a broad overview, there are 10 attachments. I'll just list them for starters. There's the attachment to stability, to the past, to the future, the attachment to control, perfection, and success, the attachment to pleasure, to youth, to yourself, and to life. So if you think of all those, they are positive, okay, at some level. But at what point do they drag you down? Do they hold you back if you have too much attachment to stability, or you're immobilized by demons from the past, or you're always living in the future and can't enjoy the present moment? So it's that line that gets in the way, and we have to be very familiar with it.
Okay. Before we jump into the first one here, one of the statements right out of your book, I pulled it out. You said the more we identify with attachments, the more we suffer. So identity is really my primary focus of my own research, vocationally and personally, is looking at identity. Is that another way? You said the severity, but also do I have to, again, looking at the roles. I mean, I was a pro athlete. I mean, I'm always going to be a father, but at some point I'm soon going to be not an active duty father in essence. I mean, kids are gone. You can, I do podcasts and I'm an author. Maybe I won't do that forever. And so as I look at my identity, that's what's really set me back, Bob, is realizing, oh my gosh, I did not realize how much I had XYZ attached to how I see myself. And I think that's where it felt hopeful because there's anxiety in that, but it was also, maybe that's where my disorienting to detach myself for a little while has felt, just a little untethered, I guess.
Well, what you're really saying is that I love my identity, which is associated with what I do, versus loving myself for who I am as a human being. And the more ego we place in the role of what we're doing, I mean, you're getting at the attachment to success. I mean, when our desire for success turns into a compulsive need for achievement, we've got a problem because we define success based on other people's expectations of us versus our own expectations of ourselves. And oftentimes that's driven by the fear of failure or not being enough. And so we can get overly obsessed with drive and proving ourselves at the expense of our own happiness and fulfillment. And there's a fine line there because you don't want to undermine your motivation and your desire to do great things, but at what expense? And I think that's a common attachment. And it is the difference between living with scarcity, a scarcity mindset, and living with a mindset of abundance. Because I think one of the most important things is to love yourself more than anything, but not the role, but to love who you are as a human being. That is the strongest foundation of love. And I think people get obsessed with what they do, just like we started the conversation. And I think it's a problem.
Well, let's walk through them then. Let's walk through the 10 here if we can and I looked at them as moving from my attachment, the fear attachment to a
aspiration.
And a healthy relationship in that aspect. So number one, you've already said it, is stability. And you've mentioned multiple times already our discomfort with uncertainty. And I feel like we are a culture who is addicted addicted to certainty, but I'm going to say addicted to the illusion of certainty, because I think most of the certainty we think we have is a myth. I see you nodding. Thank you.
Yes.
So talk on that. And in there, you just mentioned the word agile, to move from certainty to being agile, which I hadn't thought about that word. I've been thinking for a while now, adaptable, to be adaptable, but either way, flexible, I guess we could say too. But this certainty I feel like we're killing ourselves with it. It's the media, it's the headlines, it's the social media, it's this constant arguing for black and white and right and wrong and polarized and certainty. And I'm looking at most of them and go, man, almost everything that's being argued about is primarily subjective. Not to say it doesn't matter, but we're talking about opinions and perspectives. You can feel strongly and confident, but certainty. So tell us how we move from this aspect of seeking stability in an unhealthy attachment.
Well, I think everybody is brought up believing that you want to create security and stability in your life. And that's part of success. I come from the school that is more Eastern, that every time we breathe, the world changes. And we breathe into vulnerability. And by definition, we're vulnerable, imperfect human beings, and we're doing our best to figure out how to live a great life. And so we love that feeling, but it's simply unsustainable. So the way I say it is that stability is an illusion and uncertainty is reality. So then the question is, how do you live with uncertainty? Well, you try to create as much security as you can, but you have no idea what the next moment or the next day is going to be, what shows up for you. And so you have to develop a much different relationship with change. I mean, we think that change happens to us, but oftentimes, if we step back and take perspective, change happens for us for a reason. Sometimes we don't understand the reason when it happens, but with some distance, we can get a sense of how even the greatest psychological pain that we feel actually can be to our advantage, because we don't change our behavior unless the psychological pain is greater than the resistance to change. And if we become aware of the psychological pain, that drives behavior change. And that's one of the problems with the habit field, is that it doesn't appreciate the importance completely of the psychological pain that drives change. And so I think the key is you got to go deeper to understand this stuff. You got to give yourself permission to fall down and be imperfect in uncertain conditions. And then you have to realize that life is not stable. It's uncertain by definition, and that's okay.
Okay, as you're talking, I'm even thinking, Bob, that does this align? That I want, instead of looking for stability, looking to control what I can't control, trying to make things certain, looking for stability, I can be stable.
Definitely.
I'm stable. I was thinking about, you come from, business world and stuff as well. If all my security, my confidence is in the business, whatever business X that makes money, then things can happen. I've probably, like you, I've had plenty of business that have gone upside down for different reasons, COVID, whatever, that I can't control. But if my confidence, my security is in my ability to make money, to go out there and kill something and drag it home, that's something that can be taken away from me. Nothing can alter that. Exactly. Am I tracking?
Yeah, it is exactly right. If you love yourself, you have the confidence to master your environment in whatever conditions show up for you. And a lot of people lack that confidence. It's the reason why they're not resilient, is when stuff happens. It's interesting. There's some research out of Sweden years ago that said that if a teenager between 15 and a young adult 25 doesn't have a life crisis, they are at risk for falling apart at age 50. So there's something about living our lives and falling down and getting up that we learn lessons and we get stronger as a result of thriving in uncertainty. And we just have to change our relationship to change in that sense. And, this whole notion of mastering change, I mean, it's kind of arrogant in a sense. I mean, we shape our environment as best we can, but there are limitations, and that gets at the attachment to control. But so I'll give you just one quick example. David was a fellow who controlled his entire life, and his house was perfect, and he kept his relationships separate, never got into an intimate relationship. And he went to his teacher, he was into the Enneagram, and he went to his teacher, and his teacher said, "You got to take some risks in life. Allow yourself to fall down and get up." And he took a couple risks, and he was a lawyer, and he was very successful in the Department of Treasury, and suddenly he got a call from Obama to become Assistant Secretary of Commerce, because he was willing. And then he got married. He took some risks, and he found somebody that he loved, and he got married, and suddenly his life was totally different because he slowly chiseled away his attachment to change, to stability. And I think we all have stories like that.
Well, I'm so curious. Your study, if between the ages, I think you said 15 and 25, if we haven't had a crisis, we're at risk in essence. Now, I'm going to say it's a first world problem crisis that I had, but as a kid, my parents didn't shield me. My dad was an entrepreneur. I was about 15, 16, and he totally lost his shirt in a business, lost the house, lost everything. And I saw them go through that with such faith. And at the end of the day, we still sat down, had our food, and watched Dallas or whatever show was on at that time. And it just, my stability, I was so privileged to see that it wasn't in the external. It was in, at the end of the day, we can come together, have a meal, and we're still us. And what a gift. So I'm going to tell my kids, all right, guys, crisis time. We got to make something happen for you. That's great. So the past, number 2 is the past, your attachment to the past. And I don't want to wrap it up in this, but to some degree, I felt like you pointed as maybe a tip of the spear for this issue being emotional baggage. Is that correct?
Well, I think many of us are living in the past. We have dreams which are good, and we have memories that are good. But some people idealize or demonize those memories, and they become immobilized by old emotional scars or relationships that don't work or business deals that went sour. And by not facing the truth about those problems and then practicing forgiveness and rewriting your story, you can become shackled by the past. And a lot of people in therapy, because they're holding on to baggage from the past. And the only way to get through that is to learn how to surrender and let go to it, and then forgive the person. Don't forget, but forgive the person, because they probably did the very best that they could at the moment, given the resources that they had. And then forgive yourself, and then rewrite your story, because you're not the same person that you were in the past. You have more skills now as an adult, and so you don't have to be shackled by those old demons. And so I think the attachment to the past does affect a lot of people.
I want to ask on that. This is one of my favorite analogies as you talk about forgiveness or acceptance and also rewriting the story. I have a friend, and my listeners may have heard this story before. Long story short, she had really, really significant abuse as a kid from her father, just horrific stuff. At some point, then she gets away from him, separates, kind of does her, therapy to some degree and tries to get away from it. So, but now it's 20 years later. Not only is the guy gone and she hasn't had any contact with him, he might have already been dead at this point. Anyways, she just at some point in her own awareness realizes, okay, that happened back then. I mean, it happened. It was terrible. It was wrong. It was criminal. It was whatever. But that was 20 years ago, or however long it can be for somebody. It's just today, he's not abusing me. Today, I'm abusing myself over and over and over with this. And I felt like that's kind of, oh my gosh, that's going to be really hard for some people to take, but it's hard to refute too. And for me, it feels hopeful. Fair?
It's very hopeful, and you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happens. And a lot of people carry baggage from the past, and we can choose at this very moment. We can choose to make a different decision and say, let's surrender and let it go, because I don't have to carry it anymore, and let's move on. Now, it's interesting because some people, unless you want to ask another question about that, I was just going to go on to future.
No, go. I'm sitting here thinking about that too. So no, go right into future. That's number 3.
So the flip side of that is that many of us are preoccupied by the future. Okay. We obsess over what is missing in our lives. We're never satisfied with who we are or what we have. And by worrying about what's to come and believing that we will only be happy in the future, we diminish our confidence and peace of mind. And the attachment to the future is to become content in the present moment. Doesn't mean you don't plan, doesn't mean you don't dream. It just means that you believe that you've got everything that you need right now to be happy. And practicing mindfulness and meditation helps. Living in the present, not worrying about the future, embracing the unknown with curiosity, all that stuff is really important. And it's interesting. My husband Jay and I, we have dinner parties, and we ask people at the dinner party, Kevin, do you live in the past, the present, or the future? And the people who live in the past are generally depressed or sad. The people who live in the future are generally worried and anxious. But the people who primarily live in the present are happier. And everybody wants to live in the present, but they get pulled into the past or the future depending upon what attachment they have. And so, I have a colleague of mine, my attorney. He is one of the most effective attorneys in the world. The story is in the book. There are a lot of stories in the book, and he basically has written like 25 books, law books. And we have a sort of funny conversation every time we have, well, how many books is enough? And at what point, and he said in his later years, he now says, I needed to buy a vacation home to just disconnect. I needed to appreciate my grandchildren now to just disconnect because I was on this drive, at the expense of my own quality of life. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is what you write about.
Well, I got a question for you, Bob, on this. Attachment to the past has never been a big issue for me, but the future has. So I resonate with that. However, I've never had the feeling of, it's not so much of a discontent with what I have. I've so often felt like right now I am the richest man I've ever known. I couldn't, if you put $1 billion in my bank account, this moment could not be bettered in any way. So I felt that a lot, but I love having, hope and interest, and I have innate, curiosity. I wake up in the morning thinking about the things that I'm doing, the projects, and I like that. And I have felt like it was healthy as well. But what I realized is, one, I'm not in the present. I'm not being present. I'm not here. I am somewhere ahead thinking about all this stuff that I'm doing. Didn't understand. It took a long time to realize that, as you said, it was still causing me anxiety. And I didn't connect it because I didn't see it as that I didn't like the present. I didn't see it as worry. I saw it as excitement, but it still manifested as anxiety. And I don't know that I've really pulled that together even till right now, Bob. I have gotten the message of being present. But holy smokes, I lived in the future.
I lived in the future. And it was mainly because I didn't really like the past. And so the future was all about my dreams and success. Yours was a different story. But I think a lot of business people, they do live in the future. And they don't realize the impact it has had on their relationships and on their health until too late in life. And that's one of the things that the younger generation is potentially teaching us, is that let's pay attention to quality of life early in our lives. So I think it's a really interesting one. Yeah.
Bob, it reminds me of Rick Hansen, Hardwiring Happiness.
Right.
Yeah, on that. So Hardwiring Happiness, well, folks, you can go, I did a show with him, but how we're not present and we don't hardwire in those happy moments as much as we should. And Bob, that's a regret. Bottom line, that's a regret. Now, on one hand, I could say, look, I've had 100 kids. There's been so much. I can't remember everything. And I blame that. But the truth is, when the kids continually say, Dad, remember whatever? I don't remember, because whatever was happening, I was present there, but I was probably thinking about something over here, and I was fixing this, and I was whatever, and I was not hardwiring my happiness. And so there's I don't want to say it's a joke, because I don't even joke about it. I feel kind of guilty, honestly, when they'll come up with the next thing. It feels like daily and go, remember whatever, Dad? I just don't. I think they probably give me grace because they know a lot was going on, but I look at it now and I'm concerned. It's because I wasn't really present, and I don't want to be that guy.
Well, that's why self-awareness is a lifelong commitment. And we learn sort of kernels of self-awareness as we evolve as human beings. And I think we have the potential to be much healthier at the later years than we are in the former years, because we're just living life in the middle. Go ahead.
Well, I'm so interested. It's going to say, I want people to take gravity with this one, because your fourth one here is control, is attached with control. And this is something that has really become prominent for me, I think, at my age and with my peers and whatnot, that a lot of them feel like they are in control. I should own it. I have too. Feel like you're in control because you have overcome most of your circumstantial stuff. You've made some money, you've got some stuff, you've got a family, and things are kind of good, but it's because you've got control over there. And found with myself and with others, and one of those things is threatened or lost, whether that's a relationship with a divorce, or a kid who turns their back on them, or a business, or finances, that all of a sudden, COVID, maybe they were doing great and worth millions, and they literally lost everything, went bankrupt or whatever. When you take those away, the security wasn't there. It was obviously in that stuff. And yet we walk around and don't realize the threat that we feel. And I still see it seeping in. The threat's still there, kind of like the anxiety. It's still there because you still know it's tenuous. It's still connected to things you can't fully control. And that, to me, looks like there's a red flag. I got trouble brewing. Fair?
Yeah. From early childhood, we're taught to shape our environment and to maneuver and manipulate and influence and get what we want. But something happens in that process that we start to try to control the uncontrollable. And as a result, we hide our vulnerability because we can't control things that we think we should. And by definition, we're vulnerable when that happens. Most men are scared to death of vulnerability. They don't want to talk about it. You and I are talking about it because we do this for a living, but a lot of people, have trouble being vulnerable. And
and Bob, I haven't been, and it wasn't. I didn't even know. My emotional unintelligence has been very high, and these shows used to be more on a performance base. It's been in the latter years that we've gone into this area. So I was one of those people too.
Well, a lot of us are. I think that there are a couple things. First of all, there are four kinds of control, at least from my humble perspective. There's people who like to control other people. There are people and control things or projects. There's people who are controlled by other people. There are passive aggressive people who are running away from taking risks and the anxiety associated with conflict, and so they're passive aggressive. And then there are people who are over pleasing, and that's a way of controlling others by giving people what they want at the expense of yourself. And so there are multiple ways that control shows up in your life. I think that the Serenity Prayer is one of the most brilliant statements ever. I mean, because it helps us distinguish what we can and cannot control. And one of the dilemmas is that people engage in what we psychologists call ceaseless striving. They keep trying to control what is uncontrollable. And it just creates more angst and more worry. And the other thing is we got to learn how to trust more. I mean, people who are controlling tend not to trust other people. It's a real problem in the workplace now with virtual working. Because if you have a leader or a manager who doesn't naturally trust, imagine what it's like managing a virtual workforce. Because you assume that people who are at homes working are not working because you mistrust them. And that's a real problem in the new workplace. So I think this control issue is very different. And those four types of people deal with vulnerability differently. The people who are controlling are fearful that they're going to give up control and they're not going to get the performance or what they want from the person. The people who are being controlled by others, their greatest fear, their greatest vulnerability is that they're going to lose themselves in the process. You know, if you're being controlled, your greatest fear, and there's some truth to it, that you become powerless and you lose yourself. The passive aggressives feel vulnerable when they deal directly and they don't like conflict. And the over pleasers just lose themselves completely when they live in somebody else's world. So this control issue is a very big deal. And I think it's one of the great Achilles heels for some business people.
Well, thank you for those four categories there. I did not view myself as somebody who was controlling or had a big control issue until I realized I did. I think my primary area was, as you said, number 4, over pleasing. I tried to be the people pleaser, to make everyone happy as my way of creating happiness for myself. I was manipulating, in essence, not out of malice, but I just need everybody to be happy so I can be happy. And the efforts that I did to control and be responsible for people's feelings and behaviors took me to burnout, ultimately.
Exactly.
I was just incredibly ignorant. I was totally ignorant. And yeah, I hurt myself and others with it.
It's interesting. Every time I feel angst or anxiety, I go into looking at the 10 attachments because some combination of them is what's getting in the way of my joy and freedom. And that's actually how I came up with them. I had a dream one night in 2011, and the dream was these 10 attachments, and I was shackled by a couple of them. And I woke up and I wrote them down and I put them in the attic for 12 years until I brought them down and got really excited about writing the book. And I don't know where they came from. They just came from life, I guess, and talking to people. You never know what comes from dreams. And now perfection is really the flip side of control. It's different, but it's similar. And a lot of business people grapple with this. We are imperfect by nature. Yet how many of us are ruled by the need to be perfect? I mean, now keeping this quality to ourselves would be bad enough, but we impose it on our kids, we impose it on our business associates, and we impose it on our friends. And out of the fear of looking inadequate and making mistakes, we worry and try to achieve perfection, which is sort of idealized, flawless standards that are impossible. And so what we have to do is to accept our strengths and shortcomings and fall in love with our imperfections. And that's hard to do for a lot of people who are very committed to excellence and striving and being the best. But as Michael Phelps will tell you, or Simone Biles will tell you, they were great athletes. They strive. They were trying to be the best, but it wasn't very good for their life. And they had to go in different directions to figure out how to fall in love with themselves as human beings and also be the GOAT in their various fields.
Give a quick, how are we most missing it? Because I feel like I've heard messages on perfection. I think anybody, including me, has said, I know, nobody can be perfect. Oh, I know. We all know that. We all intellectually agree with that. I did too, and yet didn't realize how I was falling to this attachment to perfection. And it wasn't, I guess I didn't see it again because I'm not a detail guy. I don't have OCD. I'm not, I don't think I'm usually it's good enough. That's kind of me. But I had it in certain areas. And it was really in my roles, my attachment to my roles, that I had to be perfect as the fixer, the hero, the Superman, the God complex. I'm husband and dad, and you can count, there's no limits, no excuses, kind of like me as a pro athlete. I'm capable of, I can be there. I can fix it. I can handle. That was my area that I didn't realize I was so massively attached to. And I had to have other people bring it to light before I was even aware of it. And it didn't look like what I think of with people who are perfectionists. It didn't fit the mold, but I was still in it. Is that one of the primary ways we miss it? Because we have it labeled as one thing. We think, I'm not that, but you're still falling to perfectionism.
Well, I think we associate good enough with failure and that we have to be better than everybody else. And I mean, that's great for competitive spirit, but it's just not good for life. And I think if you love yourself fully, you're able to be more comfortable with your imperfections. And a lot of times we overcompensate with trying to be perfect because we don't really love ourselves deep, deep down inside. And so I'm a big fan of saying, laugh at yourself, play with your imperfections, confront your inner critic, try to sort of monitor the conversation you're having with yourself about your performance and how you're doing and how it's not good enough. And I think perfection shows up in a lot of different ways. You could want to be the most moral person in the world, or the best parent in the world, or the greatest athlete in the world, or make the most money. But there's always edges that comes from the striving for perfection because it doesn't exist.
Well, your statement, Bob, of it coming from a root of not loving yourself, I'm sitting here thinking about it, that mine was trying to prove my worth to myself.
Exactly.
And others with my providing. That's who I was. Husband, dad, whatever, friend, and I take care of everyone. Even if we're business partners, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing more and I'm taking care of more to feed this void. And I think what was interesting too is because you say, oh gosh, you're trying to get your self-worth from everyone else to some degree, but even without them, I was so rabidly trying to prove it to myself. I had to check off the list just to be okay with me, even if nobody else saw. I was like, I'm my own worst judge. I guess I'm not alone in that.
Yeah, it's sort of motivated for good reasons, but at some point beyond a line, it becomes debilitating and disenfranchising to you yourself. There are all kinds of ways that we try to be perfect, and I think a lot of parents struggle with this because, I don't have kids, but I see kids in other families. And, at some point you realize that you don't always have control over your kids. They're going to develop in their own way and they're going to go their own route and you do your best. So I think there's something about giving ourselves permission to just do the best we can and then move on to the next moment.
Well, and it obviously bleeds in. That was number 5 is perfection. Number 6 is success. And what I pulled out was from your writing was the compulsive need for achievement. That was right in line with the perfectionism aspect and realizing that I created my own measurements of achievement and success and whatever, but the attachment to success, it feels like do you feel like we're at even more risk of that attachment? Not to blame it all on, but that it's exacerbated by the social media thing and the highlight reels of everybody's success. Nobody's doing reels of their complete failures for the most part. So the attachment to success, tell us about it.
I think that it stems from just our culture and the fact that everybody is striving for success, and a lot of people intertwine money with success. But I'm a big fan of believing that everybody defines success in their own way. In county, as a county board member, and he did as much or more good in the world than I did, but he got paid so much less as a government public employee. So I think we all define success in our own way. Um, I think first off, I wrote a book called Grounded, and it was basically about the 6 dimensions of well-being, where I introduced the paradigm of who you are drives what you do. And Grounded was built around the 6 dimensions of well-being: our physical, emotional, intellectual, social, vocational, and spiritual health. And those 6 dimensions operate like an integrated whole, just like the bodily systems of the cardiovascular and the respiratory systems. They're all dependent on one another and all drive performance. But the one that drives performance more than everything is our spiritual health, which is, do I have a higher purpose? Am I connected to a global world? And do I appreciate the diversity in that world? And do I live with a generosity of spirit? That's the way I defined spiritual health. And so I think we have to aspire to new sort of icons of success, which is really about who you are as a human being. It's great if you've been successful vocationally or in your career or you make a lot of money, but it's who you are. I mean, and you've talked about this and written about this, and I think it's pretty important. I think the other thing is to not be so fearful of failure. Life is about falling down and putting band-aids on our knees and getting up. And there's something different between living with a scarcity mindset, which is the cup is half full and with the bottom out from the bottom, versus living with the cup half full, half empty versus half full, and living abundantly. I have everything that I need right now. And you had Arthur Brooks on. And I think Arthur has some really important things to say about the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence and what happens in the middle of our careers, where we yearn for relationships and legacy and learning, but we're on that path and we're not really happy. I think a lot of people get stuck there in this attachment to success. I did. And what happened to me was my attachment to the future and my attachment to success led me, after a series of operations, to get addicted to my Percocet and Vicodin because I was anesthetizing my burnout. I didn't want to deal with it. And people don't want to deal with their uncomfortable feelings, which we'll get to in the next attachment, because it doesn't feel good.
Well, let's go there. But I do appreciate you bringing up Arthur Brooks. And actually, as I was looking at this, again, you talked about the attachment to success, this compulsive need for achievement. Now, I love having something to work towards. I think we all do. We all want something to be progressing for, making progress for. And yet it was one of Arthur's colleagues, Robert Waldinger,
Oh, yeah.
And it was Robert. I think I had Robert on to talk about Arthur. It's the second or third time I had Robert on. Robert endorsed my book and just such a glorious human being to me. And I asked him, Bob, about achievements. And he said, I've always got lots of things going on and I really like that. But he says, I've gotten to the stage in life where I'm more focused on enjoying the path that I'm on. Just an elementary response, but it obviously stuck with me. Here I am a year later talking about that I like the achievement, but if the achievement's out here, am I enjoying today? Anyways, regardless of whether I get that, if I'm not, is the achievement really worth it? Now that's a broad brush. I think we've all done some things and maybe we go and kill ourselves for a short season to achieve whatever. And it was really hard, but it was worth it. So it's not discounting that, but just overall.
I think you put your finger on it.
Okay.
I mean, exactly right. We get awards and strokes as we succeed over life, but if we're not enjoying the present moment, if we're not enjoying the dinner that we have at home, if we're not enjoying waking up and feeling gratitude, something's wrong. I mean, I think gratitude is the other thing that I think is really critical. Loving yourself and feeling gratitude for what you have. I mean, if I would inject those two things into people, those are the two things that I would inject into people to be happy. Uh, Now,
I want to ask you on this next one, Bob. So pleasure.
it's a good one.
I enjoy pleasure. Who doesn't, But sometimes I feel like I really enjoy it. I read something one time, somebody did a write-up on what a sensualist is. And I thought, oh dang, man, I think that covers me. But back to kind of where we talked about at the beginning, I love the pleasures, but I grow not more cautious, but I try to remain cautious of my relationship with them. Again, do I like them? It's great. Or am I reliant on them? Is that too simplistic?
That's exactly what the difference is. And I mean, people are attached to different kinds of pleasure. I mean, could be drinking, could be smoking, could be drugs, could be shopping, could be gambling, could be social media. I mean, there's research for all of those that when your desire for pleasure turns into dysfunctional grasping for something, we've got a problem. Typically, there are two reasons why people get attached to pleasure and get addicted to something. One is the biology, and one is the psychology. The biology is that the chemicals in the brain, I responded to opiates, and I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't, but opiates were my drug of choice. And it was because it reduced the anxiety and anesthetized the burnout. Everybody's different. Everybody has different biology. Now, I don't do any of that anymore, but still, it had an effect on me. The other thing is the psychology, and that is that we get attached to pleasurable things because it helps us avoid discomfort. Helps us to avoid discomfort. So when we have uncomfortable feelings or anxiety, we do high risk athletics. We drink 4 drinks rather than 3. We smoke a cigarette. We go back on our phones. And it sort of alleviates the discomfort that we have. And so the attachment to pleasure is more common than we think. And I think the first thing is we got to understand the difference between desire, habits, attachments, and addictions. And that's that continuum that you were talking about. Then I think we got to get much more comfortable being uncomfortable. Nobody teaches us how to do that, and life makes us uncomfortable. It's just the nature of life. There's always a gap between what we aspire to and who we are. And we're always living and managing that gap. And it creates discomfort when we don't reach that level of aspiration. We have to see anxiety as a force for good, just the right amount, and stop pathologizing it. And then we have to see addiction as a brain disease, the biology and the psychology. And so I think a lot of people get trapped in this attachment to pleasure.
Well, I just appreciate the focus on it. It's one that I look at with, I don't want us to use the word caution. How about reverence with it? Because I mean, tonight I'm going to enjoy, let's see, what are we doing? My son's making fried rice tonight and pot stickers, I think. And, whatever we have, and it'll be fun. We'll have some pleasures, some taste bud pleasures and whatever. And yet I look at that as kind of a short term, lower level, baseline pleasure. I want to make sure I'm devoting a portion of my day to the longer term pleasures, the deeper wells in essence. And, I like the biology and psychology. It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I think it helps me.
Yeah, it does me too.
And look, why be against pleasure? It feels good, but there's this point beyond which it's not so good anymore.
Your next one here, youth. That stuck out to me because I thought, holy smokes. I think I did because I realized my own pondering of it these days as I am 54 years old. I'm not going to, things change and I want to respect it. Well, here's one of my questions. As we talk about an attachment to youth, and obviously I think we all know the culture of trying to defy age and not looking older and whatnot. And we have other cultures, as you know, maybe even in the past, some of the native cultures that really respected the elderly. I mean, they were held up. And today, I feel like we don't do that. And to some degree, we've kind of painted, not even just painted it badly. We've also normalized, I feel like, really lacking capacity as you get older. And now you're not old and wise, you're old and drooling. And that's the concept we have. And there's some truth to it too. I mean, we look at the blue zones, Dan Buettner talking about the blue zones, and America is not a blue zone of the elderly. I want to be older and capable, but I also got to look at, I am going to die. As you said in the book, we're all going to die. Which we're going to talk about again more in a second. But I think that's going to be new for a lot of people to hear, an attachment to youth and how is it primarily harming us? My first thought too is it keeps me from just appreciating now what I can do, who I am now. Is that it?
Well, I think that you put your finger on one of the main issues, and that is how often do we idealize our youth and diminish our older citizens, okay? Yeah. And nowhere is this process more insidious than inside our own heads. And people call it internalized ageism. And it happens in our 20s, it happens in our 40s, and it happens in our 70s. And rather than appreciate our aging minds and bodies, we ignore the many benefits of aging, like more maturity, more wisdom, more independence, and more freedom. So the question is, how do you age gracefully? Now, there's research, as I'm sure you've talked about on here, that if you have positive attitudes about aging, about your aging self, you don't get hung up because you're gray, your hair is gray, or you got wrinkles, or you got some problems in your body, that you're loving yourself as an aging person, you live 7.5 years longer on average if you have positive attitudes versus negative attitudes. That is a very powerful statistic. Now, what happens for a lot of people is that the best people, when we retire, okay, and the attachment to youth happens throughout our age, but when we retire, we choose a path. We can have one path that is really about regret, and Robert may have talked about this, regret, isolation, self-denigration, disconnection, or we can live a path of increasing self-awareness and freedom. And now there's research that says that there's a new kind of intelligence that's emerging in the last trimester of our life, like the ability to see the world in gray rather than black or white, the ability to hold paradox and contradiction in our heads, the ability to be freer, loving things rather than hooked up in ego so much. So, the 5 things I think are really important are live a healthy lifestyle, confront your internalized ageism, develop great relationships like Robert talks about, find hobbies that are consistent with your higher purpose, and develop a youthful personality. Take risks, be creative, find things that keep you active. I just bought an electric bike. I hadn't biked in 10 years. Okay? I'm 70 years old. I love my bike. And now I feel so great on my bike because I just acknowledge the fact that I need that extra push to get up hills. I carry a pacemaker and I need it. And it's just the way it is. So I think this attachment to youth is quite problematic for some people.
Bob, I think you just helped me again with the concept just of honoring my age, where I'm at. And I have...
saying it.
Well, I'm thinking about, so 2 years ago, I did this. It was this big event up in the Grand Tetons, and it was 40 miles through the Grand Tetons. It was kind of a race in a day. And so I was out there just doing what I do. So that's my lifetime as an athlete and just out there just killing it. and realized as we went by this high mountain lake and there were some people sitting beside it, that I'd rather just be sitting beside the lake. I've done this. I've done the proving myself. I've proven I can say, it was called the Suffer Fest. I've proven I can suffer. I've proven I can go fast. I've proven I'm an athlete, and I'm just kind of done. I mean, I can do that. I still enjoy it sometimes, but last year was the first year I didn't do a race. I don't think I'm going to I don't have one planned this year. I'd rather go into the woods and go sit by the lake. And I have so much joy and fulfillment that I didn't have in the past. That's a way of honoring where I'm at instead of feeling like, no, I should keep doing this so I can be whatever. I just appreciate that, honoring the benefits of my age, that I have back to Arthur Brooks. I have wisdom. I want to sit by the lake and contemplate things. I want to sit there with a journal instead of run by it. And that's not something I wanted to do as a youth. And maybe I couldn't. I didn't have the wisdom I do now, or I didn't have the thoughts to ponder. And now I do. I appreciate the evolution. I want to evolve. I think that's an evolution for me. And like you said, different for everybody else. Somebody else may decide to do a race for the first time, whatever it is. But that helped. Thank you.
Well, it's helped me sort of look at this issue, and I may borrow your idea about honoring your age, because it's a really nice way of saying it.
Good, because I thought you said it. I wrote it down, but okay. Well,
I
fine.
thought you said it, but whatever.
Whatever.
I appreciate it.
Well, your next one on self, that gets brought up to me once in a while, Bob. Attachment to self in this arena that I'm in, same one you're in, but self-help, self-improvement, personal development, whatever. Can you get too caught up in that and you're just constantly focused on self? I think it's a risk of therapy also, that you can get so enmeshed in looking in the mirror and dealing with yourself that you're kind of lost. And I've met people who I felt like that's it, that all they can see now is themselves. So I appreciate the danger of that, I think. And you said, people who, the danger of being preoccupied with our own needs, thoughts, and feelings. And do you feel like in this age of, it seems like therapy's at an all-time high, self-care, we're talking about, whatever, that maybe we ignored it some in the past, and it's good that we're doing it, but maybe we've overcorrected?
Well, there's a story in the book about a Catholic priest, Father Berard, and he has mastered both his relationship with himself and his relationship with others. And I think that's ultimately our goal in life, is that many of us are self-absorbed. We're too selfish, we're isolated, and under the guise of caring for ourselves, we withdraw from people, and we often avoid the very people who give meaning to our lives. And by fearing intimacy and connection, we risk becoming too attached to ourselves. So there's something about the balance here, because self-awareness is the catalyst for change. But at the same time, we don't want to get preoccupied with it. We want to live life. And I think by loving generously, we can avoid this attachment to self and feel true intimacy with other people. And then you can live your life by loving others and making a difference in the world. So, and that we know so much about healthy relationships. How long have you been married?
Over 30 years.
Okay. I've been together for 42. And so there are lessons that we learn from having healthy, courageous relationships. And we got to be honest, and we got to have fun, and we got to share values and those kinds of things. And we define family very differently. Everybody has their own definition of family, which is fine if it's loving and honest and committed. And so I think this attachment to self needs some attention, because I think some people are losing that ability to love generously and make connection with others.
Okay, that statement right there, I just wrote down, you said the word intimacy, because I learned at an early age how to win friends and influence people. Mm-hmm. I learned it. It served me very well to look you in the eye and use your name, Bob, and to, if we were together, shake your hand or put my hand on your shoulder, all the things. But there was a means to an end, as opposed to what I want now is the security to just be there interested in you and not really needing something for myself. Man, I've tended to myself. I've done my self-care, and now I don't need to be focused on myself. That's the avatar I have in my head. I don't know if I do it well all the time yet or where I am on the scale, but I want that. I don't want to be so wrapped up in myself. I still feel like we're in this culture of so much insecurity. Really hard to create intimacy in that is what I see. And I've suffered from it.
I think that's absolutely right. A lot of insecurity. I remember when I would give a speech, my goal was to leave and make sure everybody saw that I was smart. Today, I give a speech and I want everybody to leave a little better or bigger than I found them. And it was a total shift. I mean, my higher purpose is to do just that. But that didn't come about until I was 50. It took time. And so one wonders, do you have to do the selfish career stuff before you give yourself permission to be a human being? Or can you do it earlier in your life? And I think that's a really important question. I don't have an answer to it, but I think it's an important question. And I know I've gone through it. The other thing about couples is that it's always fun to ask your partner, whoever it is, married or not married, how do you want to be remembered if you go to a party? And I remember I used to say I want to be remembered as smart, and my partner said wanted to be remembered as nice. But over time, we flipped roles. And I think that's one of the advantages of being in a good relationship is you take on the better qualities of the other person and they broaden you so that you show up later in life as a bigger and better person as a result of the intimacy that you have between another human being. And I don't know, I think that more needs to be written about healthy relationships, and because they're changing. So there's so many different kinds, and that.
Okay, I'm enamored with the question because how do you want to be remembered? If you leave a party, I have thought about that in regards to death, which we're just about to talk about. But how do I want to be remembered? After I'm dead, my legacy, whatever. It's a very different question than tomorrow. If I'm at a social event and I leave, how do I want people to think of me? I like that a lot. I think I know my answer, but I like that. Thank you.
Well, it's sort of, I know one of the things that we're very aware of, I don't know if you are, is, going to a party and seeing who asks questions. There's some people who don't ask one question, and it tells you so much about who they are. And it's all about them and their life and their experiences, and they're really not that curious about you. And I think asking questions, just like you're doing today, is such a gift that we give to each other.
Okay, well, here, real quick, Bob. It was a story told by Zig Ziglar.
Uh-huh.
And I may get the details wrong, but it's about somebody, I think it was a true story. And she went to this very important dinner. And now I'm going to make this up. I don't know if they were both prime ministers, but let's say she had the prime minister of, one country on one side of her and prime minister on the other. And somebody afterwards asked her, so gosh, what was it like? What were the people like that you sat next to? She said, well, I sat next to the prime minister of so-and-so, and I learned about all the incredible stuff that they have done and all the impact they've had. And what about the other one? The other prime minister? From them, I learned how incredible I am. I want to be that. How do you do that? And I think what you said, asking questions. One of
the great gifts, and people don't do it so much.
Wow. Well, so life is the last one here, the attachment to life. And that thought has not been a part of me until a year and a half ago, Bob. My dad at 76, overall, great health. He's a well-known author and doing things and planning the next 20 years of his life. And he got the consummate cancer diagnosis, and he was dead 6 weeks later. And we walked with him almost every day. The last month, every day, I was at home with my mom, my brother, my sister, and walked with him. So it sounds terrible. Well, maybe not. We got to experience death and to experience it in a pretty significant way. And boy, did that change. Well, as I say, it changed my perspective. It brought me a perspective on death, onto how am I going to look at it if I got that diagnosis tomorrow, because I could. How am I going to look at it? Am I fearful? I had a friend, Jake Eagle. He's one of my closest friends, and he was on the show. He's an author. And he asked in a book he wrote, what are the emotions that you would feel if you got a cancer diagnosis right now? And went kind of from regret and longing to curiosity and whatnot. But so this has been new last year and a half of really thinking about what is my attachment to life, to my life. Tell about how that's different. I mean, it's because you could almost say it's similar to the fear of aging, but I mean, it's not. This is of your death. How does that attachment affects people's day-to-day life?
Well, this was one of the more interesting chapters that I wrote because I wasn't quite sure going into it what I wanted to say, but I knew it was important. And when I talk about death, I talk about our relationship to loss throughout our lives and death throughout our lives. And we typically think of death at the end of our life. And I was looking at it in this chapter a little broader, that as I was talking earlier, we birth something, then we grow it, then we lose it, and then it dies. And that happens over and over again across our life. But we have a real difficult time with loss. No one really teaches us how to deal with the inevitable losses of life. Judith Viorst wrote a wonderful book called Necessary Losses. And I think it's really true. And I think by fearing the death part of ideas, projects, relationships, lives, we risk becoming too attached to this idea that life doesn't have loss. And I think loss is really an important part of life. So I started thinking about what is the aspiration? What do we want to be? And I think the belief is gratitude, that we should be grateful wherever we are in that process. Grateful that you had your relationship with your dad and you had that intense relationship over the last 6 weeks. And now you have the memories of that beautiful relationship because your relationship changes when someone dies. So the couple things that I think are important is to see life with these beginnings, losses, and deaths, to let go of our unhealthy thoughts and feelings and attachments, to master this practice of gratitude, which I think is really, really important, and to conduct periodic life reviews, and complete your unfinished business at each stage of your life, and then move on to the next phase. I remember I was part of a MacArthur Foundation network on healthy adult development, and the person who was running it, his name was Bert Brim, and he I think he ran the Russell Sage Foundation. He's one of the experts on adult development. We were sitting there drinking a glass of wine, and I asked him. I was 30 years old. He was 70, and I said, "What have you learned over your life?" And the one thing he said to me is, when we go through life, we think we have to reject the past in order to embrace the future. But when we look back on life, we realize that everything was built on the step before it. And so as we evolve, and if we are self-aware and keep investing in ourselves, we're able to build a broader perspective, a deeper perspective about ourselves and our lives, which I think is really healthy. And at the end of life, we're comfortable with the transition to death. And I find some of the people who are most comfortable with dying are those who have no regrets. They engage slowly from life, and they're very much at peace when they leave the world. And I want to go that way. I want to be thinking about life and myself that way. And I don't know whether I'll be able to pull it off, but I aspire to it. So this is a really interesting attachment, and it does deal with death, but it's much more than that.
Hey, gosh, at the end of it, again, our relationships, it has me just thinking about my relationships with everything. What is my relationship with everything? And as you said at the beginning, we're talking about a lot of it is just our ideas, our beliefs, you said ideals, our behaviors. I mean, what am I attached to? And can I appreciate something and appreciate my relationship with it, but not be attached to it for my overall well-being. I mean, to that degree, I want to be Viktor Frankl. I want to have the capacity for survival that I can actually, I'll anchor with a question. I'll anchor us here with a question. That has been some of my focus as of late on looking at the concepts of attachment. I'll say validation, even the things that we so assume to struggle with, that I want to be, for my survival, at least, I want to be self-contained. I don't need you, Bob, for my survival. I don't need a good rating for my survival. I don't really need anything. I'm okay. Kind of Viktor Frankl in prison. Now, I don't want to stay there. I want to thrive. And with thriving, I want lots of things. And I want a glass of wine, and I want the things that I enjoy. I want those. But is that even a way to look at the attachments? I don't need it for my survival. I want relationships with lots of things for my thriving. But man, if I depend on that for my very sustenance, I'm at risk.
I think it's all about thriving with joy. We have lots of people who are thriving without joy, and we have lots of people who are joyful but not thriving. And I like the idea of thriving with joy because it basically puts the focus on loving yourself and being grateful for who you are and what you have. And I think that is some of the most freeing stuff that you can do, to be a good person and to enjoy life. And life will show up as it shows up, and you'll be able to deal with it. Right now is to help people understand the power of these 10 attachments. And we just finished a Detach book club guide where teams and families and friends can get together and take the whole book apart and take it attachment by attachment, or 3 a night. And we also created an assessment and a series of 10 workbooks on each of the attachments that really helps us go through the 4 steps for attacking these. One is awareness. How is it affecting you, and how do you feel internally, and how does the world show up for you? The attachment itself, and what are the fears behind the attachment? The aspiration, what does your vision of the desired state look like? And then action, which is how do you create a plan of action and recommendations that help you move from your attachment to aspirations. Because ultimately, if you don't operationalize this stuff, it becomes good ideas, but people don't apply it. And I think that's key. I got to tell you, I have completely enjoyed this conversation. And I've done a lot of podcasts, and I don't think I've enjoyed one as much as I have with you. And I so appreciate the questions and the depth that we went into these issues. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you immensely. It's just, again, I had you on here because I resonated with the book. I wanted to know more. As we've gone through this, it will be my reference point for attachment. If we're talking about emotions, I'm going to pick Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart off my bookshelf back there and flip through it and go, okay, what am I feeling? And on attachments, this is, thank you for creating that, not just a message. I really love your statement right there at the end about operationalizing these things. I want more than just a message here. I want us to not gain new knowledge, but to actually learn, which is, takes training and implementation and practice. And on that note, those resources you just mentioned, where can we access those?
You go directly to my website, bobrosen.com. And it's all there, and we'll have the assessment and the workbooks up in a couple of weeks. The book club will be up next week, and the book is available everywhere. And I really appreciate the attention that you're giving it.
I'm honored. Bob, thank you. Thanks for being with me. I am a grateful student. Friends, thanks for joining us in this discussion. That again is Bob Rosen. The book is Detach, Ditch Your Baggage to Live a More Fulfilling Life. It'll take you through those 10 attachment categories, some of which we touched on today. You can go to bobrosen.com. He's got an assessment. He's got a bunch of other resources for the book that you can check out there. And again, if you want to connect with me on how to really engage in this topic, just email me, kmiller@kevinmiller.co. Until next time, here's to the evolving you.
Yeah.